Okay, perfect. Alrighty. Well, it's really great to be here. I appreciate this opportunity to come and talk with you all a little bit more about sleep. And so today we're really going to be talking about some ways that we can support healthy sleep in children. And so some very basic things that you all can try out at home to help support your child's sleep. Okay. So as we all probably know, right, getting enough sleep is really important and it has a lot of beneficial effects when we get enough sleep. So it can impact us physically, cognitively, behaviorally, and as well as our mood, right? So when we're thinking about the physical benefits when we're getting enough sleep, it strengthens our immune system, so it helps fight off any sicknesses that we might be having, or if we're exposed to any sicknesses. It helps with muscle and physical growth. So getting enough sleep is really important for allowing our body to kind of recover from the day physically and allowing our muscles to grow and help us, and help children and us become big and strong. It also lowers the risk of chronic conditions. So when we're getting enough sleep, we are healthier physically. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about when we don't get enough sleep, that can increase the risk for certain chronic conditions like diabetes or obesity or things like that. And then when we're thinking about cognitive benefits, it can improve our attention, it can improve our memory. So when we're thinking about kids, when they're going to school, if they're getting enough sleep, then they can maintain focus in their classrooms so that they're able to kind of pay attention to what the teacher is saying and what they're being taught. And then it also can improve their memory as well. So, they're able to remember what they're being taught in the classroom too. And when we get enough sleep, it can allow for healthy brain growth. So, same for kind of like physical growth. Getting enough sleep is really important to allow our brain to grow as well. So, it gives our brain the time to be able to kind of consolidate everything that we learned that day and put it in all the right places in our brain to help with learning. And then, as for behavior and mood, when we get enough sleep, it can support our mood, right? So we're not maybe as frustrated, we're just in a better mood overall. It can also help us regulate our emotions. So, we're feeling kind of more level headed throughout the day, not so quick to frustrate, things like that. And it can also decrease our stress as well. So we don't feel as stressed throughout the day. We don't feel like we're in this kind of fight or flight during that. So I'm sure that you all are well aware of how important sleep is, and you're well aware of like if you don't get enough sleep, how your body feels the day after. Because I know I am. So with bad sleep, kind of what can those things lead to? Again, that can impact us physically, cognitively, behaviorally, and our mood. And interestingly, about 44% of kids don't get enough sleep for their age, which is a really large amount of kids when you think about it. So when kids aren't getting enough sleep, physically, that increases their risk for getting sick. Their immune system, it might not be up to what it can be if they were getting enough sleep. It can lead to unhealthy habits or some of those chronic conditions that I was talking about. And it's really not allowing our bodies to get the rest that it needs. So it's not giving that time to recover from all the energy that kids are expending throughout the day, right? And then cognitively, they're going to have a little bit more difficulty with paying attention and kind of that mental alertness overall. So we might see that in the classroom. We might see that at home when we're giving instructions. They're also going to have some difficulty finishing tasks. And if we have this kind of prolonged bad sleep, right? So we're not getting enough sleep night after night. That can also lead to poor school performance as well. So we can kind of see it come out in how they're doing in school. And then as for behavior and mood, right? the next day they might be more irritable. If it, they might be more anxious. You might notice that they feel depressed. And those kind of feelings can happen if the bad sleep is prolonged as well. It might be a little bit more difficult for them to kind of control their emotions or kind of just keep themselves in check. And that can lead to a lot of different behavioral concerns. So, they might have more tantrums throughout the day, or you might notice some more hyperactivity or impulsivity. So if you're looking at these outcomes and you're thinking that it kind of looks a little bit like ADHD, I think that that is a common thing that I have read, is that a lot of the times that when kids don't get enough sleep, some of their behavior can look pretty similar to ADHD. So now that we know, right, how important sleep is, and if we don't get enough sleep, what can that lead to? There are appropriate sleep times for kids. So how much sleep they should be getting each night, or during the day for naps. And so a lot of different websites, so like the CDC, American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Sleep Foundation, they'll have all of these this information about like what is the recommended sleep for each age. And so that's where I grabbed this information from. I know that we had kind of a spread of ages, I've heard. So I know that we had a 2-year-old. So that would be, we're going to get 11 to 14 hours of sleep, and that is including naps. And then I think there was a 5-year-old as well. So that'll be 10 to 13 hours, including naps. And then probably some of the kids will fall into this 6 to 12 school age range, and then this adolescent 13 to 18 range. So, if they're between this 6 and 12 range, then they should be getting, 9 to 12 hours of sleep per night. And then if they are a little bit older, they should be getting 8 to 10 hours per night. And then us as adults, I think it's important that we are getting 7+ hours per night. I know that that is definitely needed for us as well. So this can be really helpful, kind of just to see what the national standards are for the recommended sleep for different ages. Okay. So after you've kind of learned about the recommended sleep times, and knowing your child, right? Are they meeting their current sleep needs? Are they under the sleep needs? Or do you see that they're over the sleep needs? And so, you can feel free to unmute yourself. You can answer in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with.
No responses yet, but I know that the answer for the adult is no. Sometimes I'm getting better, but yeah, that sometimes seeing, and I wonder if this happens for any of our families today, seeing what is recommended and knowing that your child isn't there can cause some stress, like, oh no.
Yeah, I think that can definitely happen where, you're realizing like, oh, maybe they're not getting the amount of sleep.
One answer is a little bit under that.
A little bit under, yeah. And I think it's really common that we see this number of like anywhere between like 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And I think that is when people say that, then they're really probably talking about adults. Adults are the ones that need at least 7 hours. So, even if your child, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Right. I was just going to say, and I think you're going to address this, but sometimes the question also is maybe if you added up, it would come to the right hours, but it's interrupted sleep. Like there's some wakeful periods and then back to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an important component too, right? Like, so they might be in their bed for the proper amount of time, but like throughout the night, they might be waking up multiple times, getting out of bed, things like that. So then it's still not leading to the amount of sleep that they probably need. So, whether your child is meeting their current sleep needs, or if they're a little bit under them or if they're a little bit over them. I think this information is important because now you have a starting point of, an idea of where your child should be at. Um, and even if, they're under them or over them or meeting them, right, there can still be a lot of issues in that sleep. Um, so about 20 to 40% of infants and school age kids have difficulty with sleep. So that can be anything from like waking up in the middle of the night, having difficulty falling asleep, having difficulty sleeping alone. And so those are a lot of the common issues that I see in clinic, as well as kind of that difficulty with falling asleep and that difficulty with kind of the repeated nighttime awakenings. And so then that leads to them waking up tired or maybe some daytime sleepiness as well. And so before we talk about nighttime, I want to talk about during the day. And so it's important to set up a good day so that we can also have a good night. So when thinking about the day, we want to make sure that kids are having a balanced and nutritious diet, so they're getting all the nutrients they need, they're getting regular physical activity, and they're maintaining a daily routine as well. So when we're thinking about diet, right, we again want to make sure that they're getting the nutrients they need, they're getting all the foods from the food groups, and thinking about timing of when they're getting those foods too. So if we're having really big meals too close to bedtime, that can be really disruptive to sleep. We also want to avoid things like caffeine, so like sodas or any like sugary snacks before bedtime, because that can disrupt their sleep as well. When we're thinking about physical health, we want to aim for about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And then also thinking about the timing of that physical activity too. So we don't want it too close to bedtime. We don't want them to be super, super active right before they're going to bed, because that can also disrupt their sleep too. And then when we're maintaining a consistent daily routine, right, that can help in increasing like longer sleep duration. And also it just makes it easier for when we are setting up our routine at night. So when we have a consistent daily routine, we can have a consistent nighttime routine. And so it just kind of makes it easier on everyone. So those are some aspects during the day that we want to consider. And then now we're going to talk about nighttime, right? And I like to prefer to call this like our sleep hygiene. And so there are three components of sleep hygiene that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the environment. We're going to talk about bedtime routines, which we're going to spend probably a majority of our time on. And we are going to talk about screen time, which I think is a very important topic. So the first one is the environment. And so the environment is really kind of just like how you set up the bedroom, what the room should be like when kids are going to sleep. The number one, probably most important thing is that the bed is for sleep only. So we really want to associate the bed with just sleep. We don't want to associate it with anything else. We really don't want kids to bring all their toys in the bed and start playing on the bed or things like that. Or, if you have older kids who are teenagers, right? Or even, some of our middle schoolers, maybe, or older elementary, we don't want them to be doing their homework in bed. And I know that I can definitely be guilty of that. Sometimes I will bring work to bed, but we really want to make sure that we're just associating the bed with sleep. We're not associating it with fun. We're not associating it with homework. So we're really only there for when we're feeling tired and we're about to go to sleep, or when we're actually sleeping. So that's probably like the number one thing that is most important about the environment. thinking about different parts of the environment. So a lot of times they recommend that the bedroom should be cool, dark, and quiet. So that's kind of thinking about the temperature, the lighting, and the noise of the bedroom. So when looking at temperature, most research has shown that cooler temperatures support healthier sleep. So anywhere between like 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit sets up not just children, but everyone for a good night's sleep. Also thinking about lighting too. So before bedtime, right? So like maybe after dinner, maybe it's kind of wind down time. We want to dim the lighting. So we're not having like really harsh lighting and then we're going to this dark bedroom. Maybe we're having more warm lighting as they're kind of doing their after dinner activity or things like that. So we're kind of getting the body ready for sleep and we're signaling to our body like, okay, it's almost time to go to sleep. And then we also want to reduce any unnecessary lighting. So things like charging stations, lamps, gaming equipment that has the bright lights and things like that, and excessive night lights too. We want to reduce all of that unnecessary lighting. For night lights, I think that is something that commonly comes up with parents and commonly comes up with kids too, is that they want a nightlight. And I am perfectly okay with a nightlight. I think, it's appropriate for kids to have nightlights, and I've seen it set up in a couple different ways, right? So, maybe they just have one nightlight in their room, or I've seen it, if they sleep with the door open, then there's a nightlight in the hallway. So that light is more coming from the hallway versus in their room. Really, the idea is when you're thinking about lighting in the room, and this is a tidbit that I've learned, is that if you're in the room and you say you have the bedroom environment set up and all the night lights or things like that, if you can read a book, then it's too bright for the kid. So then you got to reduce some of that lighting. So you shouldn't be able to like read a book in your child's room at nighttime. So I would say from this picture, if we were looking at it, I think there's probably too much lighting, and I would get rid of some of these things that contributes to that light. And then for the noise, so it's pretty common that kids go to bed earlier than their caregivers. So, you all might still be, up and doing things and having conversations or doing all this stuff. So, sometimes sound machines can be helpful to kind of like block those outside noises. And, maybe we're making sure as caregivers that we're, a little bit more quiet so that we're able to let the kid fall asleep more easily too. So all of the different things that we should think of when we're setting up the environment for sleep.
Nikki, do you mind if I share my one lighting idea that I learned from a parent?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they worked really hard on this environment and the lighting. But what would happen is their little guy, with his sleep dysregulation, was that he would just pop up, sometimes 2 a.m. and then to be up for hours. And they were asleep, and he could flick on the overhead light. So what they did is unscrewed those bulbs, because there are times of the day where the sun may have gone down and you do want to read and you do want to see in the room. So there was an overhead light, but they took the light bulbs out at night. So when he got up and flipped the switch and played around, it still was in a dim room, and that was helpful for reducing how long he was awake. So
yeah,
another idea thrown out.
Yeah, that's a very helpful idea. Thank you. Yeah, so sometimes you got to get creative, right? If they're going to get up and they're going to flip the light switch on themselves, kind of thinking about what works best in terms of the lighting in there. Okay, on to bedtime routines, which I'm sure some of you all may be familiar with, but we're going to go over them today because they are a very important aspect of helping kids fall asleep and just creating this really healthy relationship with sleep. And so bedtime routines are these consistent, predictable set of activities that are done before bed each night. And it really helps prepare, the child, and even as adults, right? If we have bedtime routines, it can help prepare people, because we're more so winding down, we're relaxing, we're not doing anything like too stimulating that's going to keep us up. And so when we're having a bedtime routine and we have this very consistent routine, it can help us fall asleep earlier. It can help sleep for longer and maybe decrease some of those nighttime wakenings as well. One of the things about bedtime routines is, and not having a bedtime routine, I will say, is that if, there are irregular schedules in sleep. So say, one night your kid's going to bed at 10 and then they're going to bed at 7. And so it's really not consistent throughout the week. And maybe they're waking up at different times during the week, or maybe they have to wake up at the same time during the week. That can really disrupt like our body's internal clock. And that can be, not just that day afterwards, but it can be like for days afterwards, where like our own internal clock or the child's internal clock is kind of messed up. And so when we don't have that consistency in going to bed and waking up, that can lead to poorer sleep. It can lead to having those difficulties during the following day or day afterwards. And it can lead to poorer health outcomes as well. So really want to just, hone in on how important bedtime routines are. So when we're building bedtime routines, we don't want to make them like this really long list of things that the child has to do before bedtime. So typically aiming for about like 3 to 5 activities that they've got to do before they're going to bed. Again, we want to maintain that consistent bedtime and wake time. So when they're, lights are out and they're meant to be falling asleep, and when they're waking up, we want to keep that pretty consistent. Even on weekends, that can be hard to do, right? Even as adults, I think sometimes we want to sleep in, but maybe within that same like 60 minutes, right? So they're not waking up, they have to get up at 7 normally, and then they're waking up at like noon on the weekend or something like that. So we kind of want to maintain that consistency, because again, right, that irregularity, if it keeps going up and down, it's not giving us great sleep. And so we still might see some of those negative outcomes if we don't have the consistency in our schedule. We also don't want to start the routine when the kids are sleepy, because then they're not going to want to do a lot of those activities in the routine. They'll probably just want to go to bed. So when you're thinking about like when to set bedtime and things like that, you can take like the appropriate from that first slide where it had the recommended sleep time. So, say the recommended sleep time was like 9 hours, and you take the time that your child has to wake up, you can count 9 hours backwards. And that is like the time that, lights are out, they should be falling asleep during that time. And then you can kind of work your way back from there of when is an appropriate time to start the bedtime routine, right? Depending on how long tasks are going to take and things like that. And maybe you're leaving like a little extra cushion just in case things take a little bit longer, or something comes up within the routine. Also during the routine, we want to avoid screens. We want to avoid exercise or any stimulating activities at least an hour before bed. So we're going to talk a little bit about screens later. But one thing that I heard from my coworker that I really liked is that removing access to like the child's most preferred item or activity directly before bedtime. So, for example, say that your kid is really into dinosaurs and they love playing with dinosaurs. They've got a bunch of dinosaur toys and dinosaur plushies and things like that. And they want to sleep with all their dinosaurs, at bedtime and things like that. So one, suggestion might be that dinosaurs don't go in the bedroom around bedtime. Maybe when we're starting the bedtime routine, okay, dinosaurs are going to stay in the living room, and that's where the dinosaurs live for tonight. That's where they're going to sleep. And that can be helpful because then, right, if they have this dinosaur with them throughout their whole bedtime routine and it's like, okay, well now it's time to go to bed, they're not going to want to give up their dinosaur. Why would they? Why would they give up their dinosaur to go to bed? So when we're limiting that access to the most preferred item or activity, that can help maybe ease into that transition to fall asleep and maybe decrease any of resistance or any like tantrums that might occur right before bedtime. And then we're not delaying that sleep onset as well. So just one little tidbit of advice there. And then when we're thinking about building a bedtime routine, we want to pick activities that help support sleep. So things like bath or brushing of teeth. We might do like reading a book. We might do cuddles. So picking things that are calming and relaxing for the child. And also when we're thinking about bedtime routines, like they're going to change as kids get older, right? So the bedtime routine that your 7-year-old has is not going to be the same bedtime routine that they have when they're 13 or when they're a teenager. And even when they are younger, right, you can still allow your kids to get some independence in choosing some of their routine. So say they don't like some of it, like if, there are the necessary must-haves, like we got to brush our teeth, right? Things like that. But maybe they don't want to do a book, like that's not their preferred thing. You can choose another calming activity. Maybe they want to do like yoga poses or things like that. So you can give them some choice, or, within a book, right? You can give them the choice of if they'd rather listen to the book or if they'd rather read the book themselves or things like that. And then if you are kind of building a bedtime routine from scratch, or you're kind of redoing the bedtime routine that you have, I think gradual changes in bedtime routines are always very helpful. It can be difficult sometimes to go from not having this in place to having 3 to 5 activities in place, and then it's like, okay, we got to implement this exactly like this. So I think having a little bit of grace on yourself and knowing that maybe we just start with just one activity before bedtime. So maybe we're consistently reading a book. If lights are out at 8:30, at 8 p.m., we're always going to read a book. And that is just one step in the bedtime routine. And then you can gradually kind of add on more steps to the bedtime routine until you feel like you have a comfortable number of activities and you feel like you have a comfortable amount of the bedtime routine as well. So these are just some examples of bedtime routines that I have, and it can look different for everyone. So this is one example from Sleep Education where they have the whole week listed out, and it goes through kind of more so like brush your teeth, use the toilet, so things that they have to do before bed, and then it even has like staying in bed until the morning, right? And so you can kind of check it off each week. This is another one, an example of a bedtime routine where it's like bath, put on PJs, snack, brush, read story, bedtime. And so they're all pretty simple. They're not like very intricate bedtime routines that need to be done, but just it helps lay it out and helps kids see like, okay, what do I need to do next? I've done bath. Okay, now I have to go put on PJs, and now I have to go go get a snack in, right? And so hopefully it will be to the point where the kids start to know what their routine is. Like, okay, I put on my PJs, let me go get a snack, things like that. So these are just some different examples of a bedtime routine. And yes.
Oh, sorry, I just thought this would be a good time to unmute again to say I just put into the chat that I have copies of these 2 examples and can print and prepare a visual schedule for your house if you would like it. There's a form in the chat, and the way it would come to you is we can use interoffice mail in the Department of Special Ed. So if you give the school and the teacher's name, I can send it to them and they can put it into the book bag if you would like that. And I know that visual schedules are so helpful. for so many of our students, especially the students with some communication, having, pictures instead of words. It's definitely something we see with our students with autism, but good strategies for students with autism are good strategies for every child. So help yourself. If you'd like to request one, I would be happy to send it to your kid's school.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We love a visual schedule. This is a visual bedtime routine that I made for a kid that I'm working with. I didn't make a basic one. I had thought about it, but every family is different. So the tasks that you do might not look like the tasks that I would put in a bedtime routine. So I'm kind of just going to walk you through how to make one. And you might already know the steps, right? But it's really simple, right? So I just took the necessary things that this child needed to do before bed that they wanted to help set up with bedtime. And I just put it in a table in Word, so we had clean up, put clothes in the basket, shower, bath, brush hair, change into pajamas, read or play. And so then we did it throughout the week again. And I just made it something fun, right? So I think her favorite color was pink. So I just made it pink. So if you're creative, then you can definitely take the liberty in making a bedtime routine. So you could do this on like Microsoft Word, you could do it on Canva. And if you feel like you don't really want to be that creative, there are a ton of different bedtime routines online that you can look at, like under Google Images. I'm sure you could kind of find one that fits your needs and things like that. Okay, so now that we've kind of learned about bedtime routine, are there any parts of a bedtime routine that you all are incorporating currently, maybe that you find really helpful?
Nothing yet, but I do like how you suggested if none of those kind of suggestions are yet a part of your routine to, go easy on yourself and just pick one that is easy and then adding that. I like that suggestion. Sometimes, you can hear best practices and the most important things to do, and it can be an overwhelming amount of stuff to do. So if you just get started on one and build on it, I love that idea.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like when we hear recommendations, it's like, this is what we've got to do. But then, I think when we just take it one step at a time, it makes it a little bit easier to implement, and maybe having that follow through as well.
And one comment says, I'm having a hard time getting the buy-in on our visual schedule. So,
Yeah.
could be that visual schedule is maybe more of a trigger, like it looks stressful, like this have to do things. And
yeah, that's a great question. So
question.
going back to this slide, this bedtime routine is actually also a reward chart. So it's kind of a 2-in-1, right? So this child was also having a really hard time with bedtime routine. And so we made this into a little bit of a reward chart where, if she was able to do, like, we just started with, like, if she was able to do half the task, then she got a preferred reward. And that can kind of be up to the parents what it is. I think for her, she got a piece of candy, but that looks different between families. And so we started out really slow, and then we started building in more components of the bedtime routine. Or even just like, maybe if there's an activity that they really like. So say they really love reading books, that's their favorite thing. Setting up that contingency, like, okay, first we gotta, like, brush teeth, and then we can read a story. And so that way, your bedtime routine might be a little longer because you might be interchanging it with like a less preferred activity with a more preferred activity, and then a less preferred activity, and then a more preferred activity. So
And I see another idea from the chat is that in the reward they use is actually a penny chart, so that was like almost like earning money. So
oh, cool, yeah.
they got another penny, and if they didn't do all the steps, they didn't get all the pennies, but they would still earn the ones, a couple. So yeah, I like that idea. That's
a good idea.
It also can be, I was going to throw another idea for the person who commented not getting the buy-in yet, is seeing it as like just an opportunity to compliment them, and not checking off everything on the visual schedule is not something that they are in trouble for, but just it's an opportunity, like, boop, nice, you brushed your teeth, that's awesome, just a compliment, and phrasing it in positive ways. And they don't necessarily, if they're not engaged and they're not buying into the whole thing, it could be that you're not asking them to check it off, but you're doing it and just using it as a compliment. Any way that you can turn it into positive money, exactly, something, or just getting those nice compliments along the way.
Yeah, you can always turn it in, always good opportunities for positive praise if they follow through on one of the steps in the routine.
Yeah.
So,
and Lori just adding more to the comment is that he collects the pennies and at the end of the week can turn them in for prizes. So
nice.
Very complex, awesome. Well thought out of reward. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So next part, screens, which I think is very important and very relevant, since, we all have screens, even as adults, we're kind of attached to them now. And the research shows that a lot of children use their screens before bedtime, and about 97% of adolescents, so kind of like that late middle school, high school age, they use screens within an hour before bed. So that exact time when maybe we don't want screens to be there. And so when we are using screens before bed, that can really decrease kind of like our sleep health and like that healthy relationship with sleep. It can lower our quality of sleep. It definitely decreases the amount of sleep that we're getting. So, if we are on our screens and we're having this stimulating material in front of us, that can make it more difficult for us to fall asleep. And also, I'm sure you all might know this, but the light from screens, that blue light, that can decrease the melatonin production in our body. And melatonin is the hormone in our body that kind of signals, sleep. That's the thing for sleep, essentially. And so when we don't have a lot of melatonin in our body, that can signal that, we're not sleepy. And so it kind of delays that sleep onset. So we're falling asleep later. We're not getting as much sleep. And then it decreases our daytime functioning as well. So, when all of those factors, when we're using screens at night, we're not getting enough sleep, then, we might be extra sleepy the next day or things like that. And so some ways that we can reduce screen use, one thing is by talking to kids about the impacts of screen use, right? So, we really want to make sure that they are growing to be healthy and strong. And sometimes with screen, that can get in the way a little bit. So we want to talk about how screens can kind of impact their relationship with sleep. We also want to set limits on screen use at night. So we don't want screens at least 1 hour before bedtime. That's kind of the minimum is, 1 hour. If you can do more, then that's amazing. But typically we recommend 1 hour before bedtime. Not having screens inside the bedroom. And that can be really hard for kids. But, if they're in the bedroom and they have access to those screens, nothing's stopping them from getting up and going to those screens. So I've seen a lot of families they will have kind of like a designated area in the house for the screens at night. So maybe like a designated charging area or something like that. And all the screens go there before everyone goes to bed. Also avoiding any like stimulating material at night, and that's more so on parents kind of monitoring what kids are watching and things like that. So nothing that's too like energetic. Maybe if they are using screens at night, we're picking something a little bit calmer, something that's more relaxing for them. And then also, it's important for parents and caregivers to model appropriate screen time use as well. So, if you have a family designated area, then, you model yourself putting it in that area. And so when we reduce screen use, that can lead to earlier bedtimes, it can lead to longer sleep duration, and just better sleep quality overall. So that's really important too. And so, you can try, these recommendations out, or, if you are trying them out and you're still having a lot of like struggles with sleep, that might be a sign to get some additional help. So, if you're experiencing consistent struggles with bedtime, or, if we didn't really talk about this a lot, but if your child, has really loud snoring, gasping, or like any pauses in their breath. Also, any like frequent nighttime awakenings, any like nightmares or night terrors or sleepwalking. That's really important to talk to kind of your PCP about. And then any like continued behavioral concerns related to sleep. Those are some signs that maybe reaching out to some like your PCP would be helpful to find appropriate referrals for that. And then I think Ramsey will be sending this presentation out. I just have to send her the updated PDF on it. But there's also just kind of like some helpful links where I gathered a lot of this information from that you can read through as well. So that is the end of my presentation. I would love to take questions if anyone has some.
Sure, and I'll tell you what is. I'm also going to do stop recording, but thank you so much. This was full of good information. Let's see, did that. For some reason, stopping the recording is not as intuitive as starting it. There we go. Stop.